One day before my husband passed away, I discovered that his secret lover was none other than my daughter-in-law, the one praised as graceful and obedient by everyone. But that was only a fragment of the darkness that brought me to my knees. The next evening, under the chandeliers that spilled golden light across the marble floors of our $280 million estate, I sat quietly, my hands folded on my lap, my chest tightening with every breath. Serafina, my daughter-in-law, floated across the room as if she were the hostess, her emerald gown shimmering, her laughter slicing through the chatter. Guests filled the room with shallow smiles, balancing crystal glasses, whispering about business, politics, the markets, anything but the truth rotting beneath the surface. I felt the weight of their presence pressing against me, though none dared to meet my eyes for long. Then Serafina lifted her glass, her movements deliberate, her gaze locking on mine with icy disdain. She pointed and spoke, her words meant to wound. "You should stay in the kitchen and cook, so my friends do not have to look at a useless old woman." Silence crashed over the room, only broken by muffled gasps. Some guests stifled laughter behind jeweled hands. Others shifted uncomfortably, their pity just as sharp as her cruelty. My throat burned, but I forced my back straight, nails digging into my palms, the silk of my gown damp against my skin. I refused to cry, refused to collapse before them. Humiliation washed over me, a tide that threatened to drown. I stood frozen, the silver tray trembling faintly in my hands though my eyes remained calm. The scent of the apple pie rose warmly, yet it felt like ash on my tongue. In that instant, memories surged through me, memories of this very house, of long nights when my husband and I worked side by side, saving, planning, building every corner of this estate with sweat and sacrifice. Now he was gone, the grief still raw and jagged, and here I was, mocked in front of strangers by the woman who had once vowed to honor our family. My heart ached with a weight I could hardly carry, yet I refused to let my pain spill out where she could see it. Around me, the murmurs of the guests blurred into meaningless noise. I steadied my breath, lowered the tray to the table, and let the pie rest there untouched, a quiet offering that no one would claim. My palms tingled from holding too tightly, but I forced them open, smoothed the folds of my gown, and straightened my back. Without a word, without giving Serafina the pleasure of another reaction, I turned away. The polished floors echoed beneath my steps as I walked across the great hall. I felt eyes follow me, some full of pity, some of shame, others of curiosity, yet I kept my gaze fixed forward. The music swelled behind me, trying to mask the tension, but it could not follow me past the staircase. With each step upward, away from the laughter and false smiles, I reclaimed a fragment of dignity. At the top landing, I paused only long enough to draw in a steadying breath, then slipped quietly into my private room. My son Dorian sat beside his wife, his hand resting limply on the arm of the chair, a strained smile frozen on his lips. He did not rise, did not defend me, only stared into his glass as if the wine could shield him from the ugliness unfolding. I remembered the whispers I had heard, the poisonous words Serafina had planted in his ear, telling him that I was greedy, that I clung to the fortune for myself, that I would never allow them to inherit. She told him I was jealous of her beauty, that I could not bear to see my son with a younger, brighter woman. I saw those lies flicker in his eyes now, dimming the bond we once shared. The boy I had carried in my arms, who once ran to me for comfort, now sat silent, complicit in my humiliation. His weakness cut deeper than Serafina's cruelty, for it confirmed that betrayal came not just from a stranger, but from my own blood. Around us, the guests sensed it too, their gazes shifting, their pity mingled with discomfort. Serafina's smile widened, her confidence blooming in the silence he left behind. She leaned closer to him, her hand resting lightly on his, as if sealing a pact, as if daring me to challenge them both. My heart clenched, not with anger, but with a hollow ache that seemed to echo in the vast room. I wanted to call his name, to shake him from her grip, but I knew the moment had passed. He had chosen his side, or perhaps allowed her to choose it for him. Either way, I stood alone. Serafina knew it too, and in her triumph she believed the game was already hers. Jonathan, my husband, had been the pillar of this house, the man whose steady hand built both our fortune and the walls that surrounded me now. His passing left me hollow, yet his final words had carved themselves into my mind with unshakable clarity. "Be careful, Cressida. I have left everything to you." He whispered it on his last night, his voice frail, his eyes heavy with the weight of secrets he never fully shared. Since that moment, those words had lived inside me, both a warning and a vow. As I stood in the grand hall, humiliated yet unbroken, I realized the depth of his foresight. This estate, worth $280 million, was not merely marble and chandeliers, it was a fortress equipped with silent guardians. Jonathan had insisted on installing discreet cameras throughout the mansion, hidden behind ornate mirrors and carved moldings, capturing truth even when no one dared to speak it aloud. Tonight, they were recording everything. Every cruel word Serafina flung at me, every cowardly silence from Dorian, every false smile from the guests, all of it was being sealed into evidence that no performance could erase. I placed my hand on the banister, feeling its smooth surface ground me, while the faint hum of the security system echoed louder in my heart than the music drifting from the piano. They saw an aging widow, fragile and alone, a woman to be mocked and dismissed. But I knew what Jonathan had left me was more than wealth. It was protection, strategy, a final gift of power. Let them call me useless. Let them revel in their small victory. I alone carried the truth, and I alone understood that this spectacle was not the end. My voice rose in silence within me. They called me old and broken, but only I knew this performance was already approaching its last act. Jonathan Moreau, my husband, passed away after months of drifting between fragile breaths and the sterile silence of hospital rooms. His absence left the house hollow, yet the shadow he cast was immense, for he had built a legacy that stretched beyond walls and gardens. There was the mansion itself, valued at $280 million, a monument of marble and glass perched like a crown above the city. There was the portfolio of blue-chip stocks that pulsed with steady profit, the collection of antique jewelry locked away in vaults, each piece carrying centuries of history, and the offshore accounts he managed quietly, the kind whispered about but never openly discussed. I believed all of it would remain for the family, a foundation to uphold the Moreau name, to preserve what we had created together. Yet even as I stood in black silk at his funeral, the scent of lilies thick in the air, I felt the shift. Guests pressed close, their eyes sliding past my grief toward calculation. I caught fragments of whispers at the edges of the pews. "They say Jonathan signed everything over to Dorian and Serafina." My breath caught, my fingers clutching the pearls at my throat, not in vanity but in defense. Around me the mourners bowed their heads in practiced solemnity, but I saw it clearly. They were not only grieving a man, they were circling a fortune. Behind every sympathetic smile, a storm gathered, silent and ruthless, ready to swallow me if I dared stand in its path. Dorian Moreau, my only son, had always been fragile in spirit, a boy wrapped in comfort who never learned to stand without a guiding hand. From childhood, he leaned on us for every choice, never tasting the discipline of struggle or the clarity that comes with earning one's own way. I remembered how Jonathan often shielded him, how I too softened at his weaknesses, believing love could shape him into strength. Instead, it built a man too easily swayed, a man who mistook indulgence for love. When Serafina entered his life, her beauty and confidence dazzled him, and soon her voice became the compass of his every thought. In our home, decisions once shared between parents and child were now dictated by her, and he followed with the docility of someone who feared disapproval more than failure. To Dorian, her words were truth carved in stone, while mine were relics of a woman he labeled old-fashioned, a mother out of step with the world he thought he deserved. I tried more times than I could count to reach him. I spoke gently, urging him to see beyond appearances, warning him that trust is not a game. Each time he answered with a furrowed brow, a dismissive shake of the head, a silence that felt colder than anger. My voice could no longer pierce the fog she had wrapped around him. In those moments, I understood the cruelty of my position. A mother can forgive mistakes, can guide a child who stumbles, but how does she reach a son who chooses blindness? I watched him fade into her shadow, and I feared the day when his weakness would not only cost him, but destroy what remained of our family. Serafina Alden lived behind a carefully woven curtain of virtue, admired by a society eager to believe in polished images. In public, she was the celebrated physician, her intelligence praised in medical journals, her elegance photographed in glossy magazines. Reporters called her the model of the modern woman, balancing brilliance with grace. At family gatherings, she played the role of the devoted daughter-in-law, her tone soft, her hands steady as she pretended to fuss over me, asking about my comfort, offering to help with household duties as though she carried a heart of gold. Yet I knew better, for I had glimpsed the shadows behind her smile. In private, she was cold, methodical, ruthless. I remembered the pill bottles by Jonathan's bedside, the labels blurred, the doses altered. His once sharp mind began to stumble, confusion clouding the man who had commanded boardrooms and courtrooms with ease. It was no illness that stole his clarity, but her hand, trading his medication, feeding him fog. In that haze, she pressed documents before him, guiding his trembling signature across papers that bore the weight of betrayal. A will forged not from his wishes, but from her ambition, redirecting his empire into her grasp. Watching her, I felt the cruel genius of her design, the dual life she mastered so perfectly. To the world she was noble, a healer, a woman others sought to emulate. To me she was a predator dressed in silk, cloaking greed beneath kindness, turning compassion into a mask. The audience of my life saw only her bright facade, yet I carried the burden of knowing the truth. She had weaponized appearances, and it was that deception, not her beauty, that made her most dangerous. It was not one revelation, but a series of subtle signs that guided me, the instinct of a woman sharpened by years of watching and listening, a glance that lingered too long, a whisper cut short when I entered the room, the faint scent of her perfume on Jonathan's collar when he returned from what he called consultations. Slowly, painfully, the pieces formed a picture too cruel to deny. Serafina was not merely ambitious, not only scheming to seize control of the estate. She had crossed a boundary I never imagined, seducing my husband and taking from me the man I had built my life with. The betrayal doubled in weight, the knife twisting from both sides, husband and daughter-in-law. My chest burned with humiliation, and nights alone pressed down with suffocating silence. Yet I did not scream, nor collapse before their charade. Instead, I wrapped myself in silence, in dignity that no one could strip away. I wore my composure like armor, smiling at guests, acknowledging Serafina's false gestures of affection, while inside I carried the truth like fire waiting for air. I reminded myself that appearances are fragile, that deception is only strong until the moment it falters. The world applauded her, the flawless doctor, the gracious wife, the dutiful daughter-in-law. But I whispered to my heart that time has a way of washing paint from the canvas, and when that moment came, her mask would peel, revealing the face she hid so carefully. My voice within me rose, steady and unyielding. The whole world may believe Serafina's perfect play, but I know the moment will arrive when her painted beauty dissolves and her true face will stand naked before all. Serafina leaned close to Dorian, her voice lowered into a melody of concern, her eyes wide with practiced sincerity. Do you know why, when your father was alive, the accounts sometimes seemed smaller than they should have been? Because your mother kept a secret fund for herself. If you are not careful, she will sell everything and leave us with nothing. The words dripped like honey, soft enough to sound like love, sharp enough to poison. I watched from across the room, unable to hear the full exchange, but I felt it in the shift of his gaze. Doubt flickered in my son's eyes, a shadow where trust once lived. He did not challenge her, did not rise to my defense. Instead, His shoulders slumped in quiet agreement, as if her sweetness carried more weight than my lifetime of devotion. My chest tightened, an ache deeper than grief, for it was not enough that death had stolen my husband. Now suspicion was stealing my son. Each glance he cast at me grew colder, each silence more accusing, though I had done nothing but protect him all his life. I held myself still, refusing to plead, for I knew no words could pierce the veil she had drawn around him. Inwardly, I whispered the vow that steadied me. Let them think me weak, let them whisper their lies and paint me a villain. The truth is not gone, it sleeps in silence, and when the moment comes, the truth will be the blade I hold, and it will cut through every deceit they spin. The rumor spread like wildfire, carried on Seraphina's silken voice, disguised as concern, but sharpened with malice. Cressida plans to sell off the estate and run away with a younger lover. Within days, the whispers found their way into the ears of relatives who had once sat at my table, who had once bowed their heads in gratitude for the life Jonathan and I had given them. They arrived unannounced, their faces painted with pity, their questions veiled in curiosity. Aunt Margaret placed a hand on mine, her eyes searching, her tone dripping with sympathy. "Is it true, dear, that you have other plans now?" Behind her, others shifted uncomfortably, glances darting between me and the marble floor, as though the shame belonged to me. I felt the weight of their judgment press against my chest, branding me with the image of a traitor I had never been. Fury rose, hot and violent, yet I swallowed it, for anger would feed the lie. Instead, I straightened my back, let silence be my shield, and met their stares with an unyielding calm. Let them think what they wished, let them retreat to their corners whispering stories they barely dared to say aloud. I knew with the clarity of stone that lies carry their own poison, that every rumor is a noose that eventually tightens around the neck of its maker. My lips remained sealed, my heart steady with resolve. I would not waste breath defending myself. In time, the venom she poured into the family would circle back, and Seraphina herself would taste its bitterness. A few days later, at a private reception held in our mansion's grand salon, Seraphina seized her chance to strike. She raised her glass, her laughter ringing louder than the piano, and spoke with a sweetness that carried venom. If not for Jonathan, Cressida would be nothing more than a hired maid, an old-fashioned wife who knows only how to cook. The words cut through the air, drawing half smiles and muffled chuckles from the guests, while others pressed their lips in uneasy silence. Not one voice rose to shield me. I felt their stares like needles, as if I were stripped bare in front of them, my dignity dragged across polished marble, my years of sacrifice dismissed with a sneer. My face flushed, but I forced my back straight, my chin unbending. Inside, humiliation pierced to the bone, a weight that might have crushed me had I not clung to my resolve. I gave her nothing, not a word, not a tremor she could savor. I simply returned the gaze of the room with calm, unyielding eyes. To them I seemed broken. To Seraphina it looked like victory. Yet silence was my chosen weapon. She mistook restraint for weakness, but I knew patience is the hand that sets the snare. Let her think she triumphed. Let her bask in her cruel delight. The days that followed were colder than the marble floors beneath my feet. Dorian no longer sought me out for even the smallest conversation. His words, when they came, were clipped and distant, shaped by Seraphina's tongue more than his own. At the dining table he listened only to her, his eyes sliding past me as though I were no more than a shadow. Within these walls that Jonathan and I had built, I became the guest, the tolerated relic, the widow spared only out of her daughter-in-law's supposed kindness. I felt the weight of their judgment in every passing glance, the unspoken belief that I was useless, clinging to their generosity. Isolation wrapped around me like a shroud, each moment pressing down with humiliation that burned hotter than grief. And yet I did not break. My calm became my armor, my silence a reservoir of strength they could not see. I told myself again and again, betrayal had already cut me once through Jonathan, and again through the woman who now played mistress of this house. But I would not be cut a third time. My heart hardened into vow. I will not allow them to drag me into the dust. I will not give them another victory. One day soon the truth will come to light, undeniable and merciless. And when it does, there will be no escape. In that hour, it will not be I who bows my head before society, but Serafina, her mask ripped away, her triumph turned to ashes. Serafina believed she had ensnared Jonathan completely, binding him with her beauty and clouding his mind with altered medicine. Yet the truth was more complex. In rare moments of clarity, Jonathan's eyes cut through the haze, sharp with awareness, and he sought me out with a weight I had not seen in months. One evening, as I sat by his bedside, he reached for my hand, his voice rough with guilt. "I know what she is, Cressida. I know the lies, the games. I let myself be drawn into her web, and for that I will carry shame to my grave." His fingers trembled against mine, and I saw the torment of a man who had tasted betrayal both as victim and accomplice. My chest tightened, torn between fury and sorrow. The wound of his confession seared, yet beneath it lay a strange relief, for he had not been blind. He admitted his weakness, but he also revealed his resolve. With the steel of a businessman who had battled through markets and boardrooms his whole life, he vowed not to let Serafina claim victory. "Do not think me defeated," he whispered, his gaze steady. "I have secured what matters, for you." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, though I refused to let them fall. I hated him for the betrayal that could never be erased, but I loved him still for the choice he made at the end, to protect me, to shield our name. In that fragile moment, I felt both abandoned and defended, broken and yet strengthened, as if grief and loyalty could coexist in one breath. Jonathan, though weakened by illness, had not surrendered his instincts. Quietly, he hired a private investigator, a man skilled in shadows. Weeks later, a folder arrived, heavy with truth. Inside were photographs of Serafina entwined with Leander Prescott, a young banker, their intimacy captured in hotel lobbies and dimly lit rooms. Alongside were recordings, their voices low, plotting how to siphon money from Jonathan's offshore accounts, how to strip him of everything. For Jonathan, it was proof beyond doubt that Serafina was no partner, only a predator, using him as a source of wealth to drain. For me, staring at those images, a cold weight settled in my chest. My heart clenched, but the tears never came. Instead, a quiet steel rose within me, rage sharpened into something colder, a shield that wrapped around my grief. I no longer trembled at shame or burned at insult. The evidence had given me clarity, and with it a vow. They believed I was weak, mistaking age for frailty. Yet now I held their secrets like blades, and the day would come when those blades would turn against them. Jonathan, weakened but unbroken, played his final move with the precision of a man who had spent his life in battles of power and profit. He summoned Alaric Winslow, his lawyer of 3 decades, a man bound by loyalty and discretion. Behind closed doors, as Serafina schemed in ignorance, Jonathan dictated a new will. Every asset, the $280 million mansion, the blue-chip stocks, the rare antique jewelry, even the offshore accounts, would be transferred lawfully to me, leaving no space for manipulation. To seal it beyond doubt, he insisted on biometric certification, his fingerprint pressed alongside his verified e-signature, witnessed and notarized, a safeguard that no forgery could penetrate. Alaric kept the documents locked away, his silence a fortress, waiting for the hour when truth would need a voice. Days later, Jonathan lay frail in bed, his breath uneven but his eyes steady as they met mine. His hand, cool and trembling, closed over mine with surprising strength. "I have made mistakes," he whispered, his voice fractured yet resolute. "But I leave you with all the power to protect yourself." The words cut and healed at once, a confession and a gift entwined. My chest tightened, torn between the sting of betrayal and the solace of his final trust. As I pressed his hand to my cheek, I knew this was his atonement. He could not erase the past, but he had ensured the future. After Jonathan's passing, I carried his final gift like a hidden flame, warm enough to keep me steady, dangerous enough to destroy if revealed too soon. No one knew of the new will, not even Dorian, and I guarded that silence as carefully as one guards breath itself. Around me, Seraphina grew bolder with every passing day. She strutted through the halls of the mansion as if it were her rightful throne, her voice dripping with disdain. She told relatives that I lived here only by her generosity, that without her tolerance I would have no place at all. In front of guests she laughed, mocking me as though I were a burden, an old woman clinging to scraps. Each word once cut like glass, but now I let them fall and sink, each one stored within me, each insult a stone laid on the foundation of her downfall. I listened, I nodded, I let the world believe her fiction, while in my heart I counted the hours. Her arrogance blinded her, made her reckless, certain of her victory. The day I chose to break the silence was gray and still, the kind of morning when even the air seemed to hold its breath. I slipped into Alaric Winslow's office, a place untouched by time, where leather-bound books lined the walls and the scent of oak carried the weight of decades. Alaric, the man Jonathan had trusted beyond all others, rose to greet me with the solemn respect of one who knew more than he could yet say. He placed a thick folder on the desk between us, his voice low but steady. "Jonathan entrusted me with everything. Now it is time you know the truth." My hands trembled as I reached for the papers, the crackle of parchment loud in the quiet room. Page after page revealed the safeguards Jonathan had built. The will notarized and sealed with biometric signatures, the detailed records of assets locked safely beyond Seraphina's grasp. Anger burned in me at his betrayals, yet beneath it came a fragile relief. He had not abandoned me completely. He had fought, in his final hours, to leave me armed. I felt the sting of both betrayal and loyalty, coiled together in every line of ink. Closing the folder, I drew a slow breath, my fingers pressing against its cover as though it were a shield. When I lifted my gaze to Alaric, my eyes no longer wavered. The time for humiliation was ending. The time for reckoning would come, not with haste, but with precision. And when it did, Seraphina would never see it coming. Alaric's eyes were steady as he slid another folder across the desk, his voice low, almost reverent. "These are the proofs no one can deny." My hands hesitated before opening it, but when I did, the weight of the contents struck me harder than any insult. The first was a video file, recorded within the sterile walls of the hospital. On the screen, Seraphina's hand switched the labels on the medication, her movements calm, deliberate. Then, moments later, she leaned close to Jonathan, her touch lingering in a way no daughter-in-law should. The betrayal was laid bare in pixels and silence. The next were photographs, crisp and damning, taken by the investigator. Seraphina and Leander Prescott sat in a dim bar, fingers interlaced, lips meeting in careless abandon. In another frame they bent over a table, whispers caught mid-plot, papers spread between them that spoke of offshore transfers. Finally, Alaric placed before me the most decisive document, Jonathan's last will, notarized with biometric verification, fingerprint and certified e-signature side by side, a fortress of legality no one could dispute. My blood surged as I read, each line cutting deep. The humiliation of Jonathan's weakness burned anew, the shame of Seraphina's treachery pressed like iron on my skin. Yet I did not crumble. My fist clenched over the folder, my breath sharp but steady. Husband betrayed me, daughter-in-law betrayed the family. But before his death, he left me the tools to defend myself. This is not the hour for grief. This is my weapon. The truth required more than suspicion, it demanded science. Alaric arranged for experts, and soon the evidence came alive under forensic light. A forensic document examiner, a specialist trained to analyze handwriting and official seals, placed Seraphina's so-called will beneath magnification. He pointed to the signature, his voice firm. The strokes were uneven, trembling in places where Jonathan's hand had always been steady. The notary seal, meant to be embossed, showed signs of digital reproduction, its edges pixelated under enlargement. His conclusion was unshakable. This document is a forgery. At the same time, a forensic accountant, an investigator who traces financial records with the precision of a surgeon, turned his attention to the offshore accounts. He uncovered repeated unauthorized logins from a device registered to Leander Prescott, each one timed to nights when Serafina claimed to be at the hospital. Further records showed preparation for a large transfer to an anonymous trust in the Cayman Islands, a classic tactic to conceal stolen wealth. The findings converged into one reality. Serafina and her young accomplice had plotted not only to deceive a dying man, but to strip the family of everything. I sat listening, my heart pounding but my face composed. The words forensic examiner, forgery, unauthorized transfer, Cayman Trust echoed like hammer strikes in the quiet office. Each one was a nail sealing Serafina's coffin. Fury rose, but it was tempered by a clarity I had not felt in months. The law, armed with these findings, was no longer her shield. It was mine. I left Alaric's office with the folder pressed tightly against my chest, but I did not run to the world with it. Victory demanded patience, not haste. If I revealed the truth too soon, Serafina would twist her lies into another mask, weaving excuses and sowing doubt. No, she needed to believe she had triumphed completely. So I chose silence once more, not out of weakness, but out of strategy. I let her roam the mansion like a queen, her voice sharp as she called me a burden, her laughter loud when she mocked me before relatives and friends. Each insult was another thread she wove into the noose tightening around her neck. I endured their smirks, their pitying glances, their whispers that I had outlived my usefulness. They thought I was broken, that I endured because I had no choice. But inside I held the weight of every video, every photograph, every notarized page that would one day shatter her. I promised myself I would wait until the room was full, until her arrogance stood at its highest peak. Then, when she believed the world was hers, I would let the truth crash down like thunder. My voice, steady and cold, whispered within me. The more they laugh at me today, the more witnesses there will be tomorrow when she falls to her knees. The grand hall of the mansion shimmered that evening for Serafina's birthday banquet, a celebration staged as much for appearances as for joy. Chandeliers poured golden light over tables lined with silver and crystal, and the guest list read like a ledger of prestige. Colleagues from the hospital, fellow physicians in tailored suits, members of high society draped in diamonds, relatives eager to bask in reflected glory, and even journalists invited to capture her image as the perfect modern woman. At the center, Serafina stood radiant in her gown, raising her glass with a smile that cut like glass. Her words, loud enough for every corner to hear, dripped with disdain. She has nothing of her own. Without Dorian and me, she would be wandering the streets. A ripple of nods moved through the crowd, some guests smiling, others whispering, all too willing to believe in her performance. Dorian sat beside her, silent, his gaze downcast, his lack of protest an unspoken alliance with her cruelty. For me, standing at the edge of the room, the humiliation was a familiar burn, searing but no longer fatal. My chest ached, yet my eyes stayed calm as I watched. Every witness, every nodding head, every smirk etched itself into my memory. I felt the weight of the folder in my bag, heavier than jewels, stronger than their judgment. Tonight she thought herself untouchable, crowned in admiration, her arrogance at its peak. But I whispered inwardly, this banquet she calls her triumph will become the stage where her mask shatters, and the same witnesses who now applaud will soon watch her fall. The moment came with a single nod. I caught Alaric Winslow's eye across the hall, and in an instant the chandeliers dimmed, the chatter faltered, and the great screen at the front of the banquet flickered to life. At first there was only silence, then the grainy hospital footage filled the room. Serafina's hand, steady and precise, switched medication bottles, her fingers forcing the altered dose into Jonathan's grasp. The audience gasped when, moments later, she leaned close, her lips brushing his in an embrace that no daughter-in-law should ever give. Whispers of medical malpractice, even incestuous scandal, spread like fire. Then came the recordings, voices captured by the detective's device. Serafina and Leander Prescott, Their tones, low but clear, spoke of offshore transfers, repeating phrases that struck like hammer blows. Account password, Cayman account. The scheme was laid bare, no longer rumor but proof. Finally, Alaric stepped forward, holding the last piece. On the screen appeared Jonathan's true will, signed with his fingerprint and verified by a digital notary, witnessed legally. His voiceover, faint but resolute, declared his estate left to me. The silence that followed was absolute. Guests who had once smirked now stared, pale and rigid. Every insult Serafina had hurled before now turned inward, every boast collapsed into ash. I watched her face frozen between disbelief and fury as the hall itself seemed to recoil. In that moment, the perfect image she had built for years shattered, and the truth, relentless and merciless, left no escape. Alaric Winslow stepped forward, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of law. Ladies and gentlemen, what you have just witnessed leaves no room for doubt. The document Serafina presented is a forgery, already confirmed by a forensic document examiner, an expert who analyzed the handwriting and the notary seal. The hospital video shows more than betrayal. It is attempted elder abuse and clear medical malpractice, acts punishable under American law. The recordings with Leander Prescott reveal a conspiracy to commit financial fraud, the intent to strip Jonathan Moreau's estate through offshore transfers. Alaric lifted the true will for all to see, his tone firm. The only legal testament is this document, signed by Jonathan Moreau, verified with biometric evidence, his fingerprint and certified e-signature, executed in the presence of lawful witnesses. At that cue, several guests, faces pale but resolute, stepped forward. Each affirmed they had been present when Jonathan placed his hand to the paper, when the notary authenticated it without question. The weight of their testimony sealed the truth. In the framework of U.S. law, Alaric concluded, these facts are decisive. The forged will is void. The actions of tampering with medication, financial conspiracy, and deceit fall under fraud and criminal intent. The rightful and lawful heir of this estate is Cressida Moreau. The hall, once filled with whispers and laughter at my expense, now fell into a silence heavy with recognition. The tide had turned, not by rage or rumor, but by the cold clarity of evidence and law. Serafina's face drained of color as the screen faded to black, leaving only the weight of silence. She stumbled for words, her voice breaking as she cried out, "The evidence is fake. They fabricated everything." Yet her tone betrayed her, trembling, her eyes darting from corner to corner as though searching for an ally who no longer existed. From the crowd, a man's voice rang out, firm and cutting. "We once admired you, Serafina. Now we see it was nothing but a filthy performance." A murmur spread, no longer the hum of admiration but the sharp edge of contempt. Dorian sat rigid, shock etched across his face. Slowly, he turned to his wife, his eyes wide with disbelief, then to me, his mother, and I saw the first glimmer of recognition that he had been used, twisted into a weapon against his own blood. The air in the hall thickened, the chandeliers above seeming dimmer as the mood shifted from polished celebration to suffocating disgrace. The same people who once applauded Serafina now avoided her gaze, their whispers carrying pity for me and disdain for her. I did not need to raise my voice nor strike with fury. I only stood tall, shoulders steady, my head lifted. When I finally spoke, my words were quiet, deliberate, each syllable falling like stone. Every insult she cast upon me has now turned to ash clinging to her own face. The truth had spoken, and no defense could cleanse it. The banquet ended, but the storm had only begun. By dawn, headlines blazed across every major outlet. Dr. Serafina Alden accused of affairs, including with her father-in-law, and forging $280 million estate will. Her polished image collapsed in a single night. The medical board convened an emergency session, issuing a statement of suspension while they opened a full investigation. At the hospital where she once strode with authority, administrators stood before cameras, their words sharp. "We condemn all acts of fraud. This matter is under serious review." Her colleagues whispered in corridors, avoiding her name, their reputations too fragile to be tethered to hers. In the social circles where she once reigned as queen, the shift was merciless. Invitations were rescinded, phone calls went unanswered, friendships severed overnight. The same women who once raised glasses in her honor now erased her number to protect their own standing. The silence of abandonment was louder than any condemnation. She had been the image of the perfect doctor's wife, admired for her grace, envied for her influence. Now she stood as the embodiment of betrayal, her name spat with disdain, her face plastered on tabloids not as inspiration but as scandal. Her arrogance, once mistaken for poise, was revealed as cruelty. In less than a day, she lost what she had spent years constructing. And as the world turned cold, I knew she had stepped into the very abyss she had dug for me. Alaric Winslow moved swiftly in the aftermath, his footsteps echoing authority as he entered the courthouse with a thick stack of documents. That same morning, he submitted the file not only to the civil court, but also to the police department. Within its pages lay a devastating list of charges. Forgery, he declared, for the falsified will, its handwriting already proven fraudulent. Fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud for the scheme with Leander Prescott to drain Jonathan's offshore accounts. Medical malpractice and elder abuse for tampering with medication and leaving a vulnerable man in confusion. Each term carried weight, each count a blade aimed at the polished mask Serafina had worn. Under U.S. law, Alaric reminded the officers, these crimes warranted more than shame. They could result in criminal prosecution, the permanent loss of her medical license, and civil damages awarded to Cressida for the humiliation and emotional harm inflicted. Police acted immediately, seizing Serafina's devices, her laptop, her phone, even encrypted drives, while forensic teams prepared to dissect every file. The banquet guests, once silent witnesses to her arrogance, were now listed formally as witnesses to her downfall. Some pale-faced society figures gave sworn statements, while others trembled at the memory of what they had seen. By afternoon, Serafina's name was no longer whispered with admiration, but spoken in the language of indictments and legal proceedings. The stage she once ruled with mockery had shifted into a courtroom where truth, sharp and cold, would dictate her fate. When the scandal broke like wildfire, Leander Prescott vanished without a trace. Within hours, he severed every line of contact, phones unanswered, messages left unread. Bank records showed he had quietly emptied his personal accounts, transferring funds beyond reach before disappearing into the shadows. By morning, headlines screamed the betrayal. Young lover flees, leaving Serafina alone to face charges. The story spread faster than fire, feeding a public already hungry for her downfall. Online, the chorus was merciless. If even her lover saw her as nothing but a tool, who could still believe in that false image of virtue? Memes, jokes, and cruel commentary flooded the internet, tearing apart the mask she once wore so proudly. For Serafina, Leander's abandonment was the final blow. Without him, the conspiracy unraveled, leaving her not only disgraced but utterly isolated. Friends had turned their backs, colleagues had distanced themselves, and now even the man she risked everything to protect had cut her loose to save himself. When the storm of truth finally settled, it left Dorian broken in its wake. The man who once sat so proudly at Serafina's side now wandered the halls of the mansion like a ghost. His eyes were hollow, his voice lost in silence, as realization carved itself into his heart. He saw at last that his mother had endured months of humiliation, not because she was weak, but because he had been blind. The image of the perfect wife, the flawless doctor he had worshipped, lay shattered before him, revealing not devotion, but treachery. One evening, unable to bear the weight any longer, Dorian fell to his knees before me. Tears streaked down his face, his words choking between sobs. "I was wrong. Mother, forgive me." My chest tightened at the sight, grief mingling with a tenderness I could not deny. I placed my hand upon his shoulder, steady but firm, my eyes holding his with both sorrow and steel. "Blind love nearly made you her accomplice," I told him, my voice low yet resolute. "This lesson is yours to bear." Around us, the silence of the house deepened, filled with the echoes of all that had been lost and all that might yet be rebuilt. To the world outside, it was justice served, a fitting fall for those who had betrayed. But in that private moment, it was also a fragile spark, a reminder that even amid ruin, the bond between mother and child could still be mended. The Moreau mansion, once a theater of scandal, now rested in silence. The echoes of betrayal had faded, replaced by the soft rustle of roses swaying in the evening breeze. I sat alone on the wide veranda, the horizon ablaze with sunset, its crimson glow spilling across the gardens Jonathan had once admired. His voice lingered in my memory, clear even after all the chaos. Use everything to protect yourself. I turned my gaze toward the mansion, its marble walls gleaming, its windows reflecting both grandeur and scars. The estate was mine now, secured by truth and law, yet it carried the weight of memories too heavy to ignore. Within its halls, laughter had been twisted into weapons, and loyalty had rotted into deceit. My heart wrestled with choice. Should I remain here, guarding the legacy, or leave for a quieter home where peace was not poisoned by history? I lifted my glass of wine, the liquid catching the last rays of sun, casting a deep red glow across my face. In the stillness, words rose within me, steady and sure. I have learned one truth: age is never a burden. It is strength, a wall that shields us from deceit. As long as we hold to the truth, no one can strip us of our dignity. The garden lay radiant before me, serene and untroubled, a stark contrast to Seraphina's downfall beyond these gates. She flailed in disgrace while I, at last, found stillness. If this story touched your heart, share it to remind others that truth and dignity are the greatest powers we carry, even in the face of betrayal.